Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today is Monday, September 23rd, 2024. We are gathered for a morning work session, and our topic is to have a good conversation about early childhood services and interacting with our friends with the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County. My name is John Kafalis, Commissioner from District 1, currently the Chair of the Board of County Commissioners, joined by my colleagues, Kristen Stevens from District 2 and Jody Shattuck McNally from District 3. Across the way, we have our County Manager, Lorenda Volker. And before we turn it over to you folks, Lorenda, are there some comments you would like to make to perhaps cue this up a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So you might recall that several years ago, we had community members come and approach us, the United Way and the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County, about doing a sales tax to support childcare. At the time, there wasn't much time left to sort of massage the language. Timing was short for us, and there was a lot of learning we all had to do. And so we regrouped. We published an RFP for services in the event a sales tax gets passed. Early Childhood Council of Larimer County won that award and has been working with Heather O'Hare, our Human Services Director, to put those thoughts together and those documents together. Today is a status update. This will not be on the November ballot, as you know. And so they're here to talk about what the plan could be, what the thought has been, the work to date. A lot of great things have been happening. And more than anything, a lot of really good conversations and partnerships have really formed from this. And I think you'll see that throughout the presentation.
Thank you very much, Lorenda. Heather, will you begin?
I will just begin with introducing myself. Heather O'Hare, Human Services Director, as Lorenda said, and I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Welcome, Christine and colleagues.
Thank you. Christina Taylor, Early Childhood Council CEO, and joined me is
Liz Means, Chief Strategy Officer at Early Childhood Council.
Thanks for having us today.
Again, as a reminder, please, if you could talk into the mic as much as possible.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Will do. Thanks for having us, and thanks for queuing us up, Lorenda. As Lorenda mentioned, we'll just go through kind of where we've come so far and what we anticipate the next steps being so that we're all kind of on the same page. I'm going to figure this out in a second. There we go. Okay, so as Lorenda mentioned, in 2021, we put together a 17-member steering committee. It included Commissioner Stevens here and several other members of the community to determine the best process to follow to bring in some public funding for early childhood here in Larimer County. We've done a lot of research over the last 20 years to really determine what the solutions are to increasing access and availability of childcare here in Larimer County, and have come to the conclusion that public funding really is our best choice. During that time, we engaged in cost modeling using Brodsky Research, which really helped us understand the breadth of the issue and the areas in which we needed to invest. And we also did a significant amount of case study work to determine what other communities are doing to fund early care and education using public funding, what works, what doesn't work. We used case studies both from here around the state, San Miguel County, Summit County, places like that, and then also national efforts like Pre-K 4SA in San Antonio, the work that's happening in Oregon and others. We also worked on policy design during that process, really to determine where funding would go. Should we bring in public funding into the system? And we'll go over kind of where we've landed on that in a little bit. And then we did initial polling in 2021 as well, and really learned during that time, and this should come as no surprise, but in 2021, the community was very tapped into the childcare issue, given where we were in the pandemic and the fact that everyone had their kids at home. So we were well clued in, and the community was very much behind public funding to support early care and education. As Lorenda mentioned, we did not have enough time to fully flesh out what this would look like, and so had to kind of hit pause as we figured out what the best path forward would be. In 2022, we took some time off a little bit to regroup and really invested heavily in a public information campaign called Larimer Thrive by 5. We also engaged a outside consultant to do a postmortem of sorts on the 2021 initiative. So this individual did interviews with all of the folks that were involved in the issue. I believe they talked to some of you commissioners, just to determine kind of what worked and what didn't work in our 2021 process, and really helped us to determine the best process to move forward. In 2023, so last year, we did a revamp of the policy design. I don't know if this will open, but we can try. It doesn't look like it'll work. Okay, well, you can find it at larimerthriveby5.org. We worked hard on determining, or rather, not determining, but putting together a really clear, concise plan for this public funding initiative, mapping out exactly where the funding would go, which I'll talk about now. Won't be able to show you, but we, the last time we talked to county staff on the estimated annual revenue of a sales tax initiative. As a reminder, we're looking at a 0.25% sales tax. The estimated annual revenue was around $27 million. In 2023, we worked hard on determining exactly where that funding would go. I worked alongside Heather and the Department of Human Services to really determine what that needed to look like, and really landed on, the allocation of that $27 million as follows. About 50% of that would go towards tuition assistance to families to really help them afford childcare, with a goal of capping the amount a family spends to 10% of their annual income. Another large portion of that, between 30 and 40%, goes directly into the workforce investments, so funding workforce subsidies or salary subsidies for educators. As a reminder, they are in the bottom 2% of all professions in the United States right now, making between $13 and $15 an hour. We've made some strides here in Larimer County in terms of increasing the salaries of early educators, so I think we're slightly higher than that now, but it is still well below what is needed to be self-sufficient in Larimer County. We've also modeled the inclusion of quality improvement investments, so really ensuring that classrooms are equipped with the right materials needed to educate children appropriately and effectively, and investments in the educators themselves, so professional development, training, et cetera. In that policy design, we've also set aside some funding to invest in capital improvements, so improving buildings that already exist or building new ones, depending on what the need in the community is, to ensure that we have enough space. In that funding plan worked out between Heather and I and you all, about 20% of that funding would be set aside as within the county government as a reserve, so to prevent an inevitable cliff effect if this tax does not get renewed after its sunset, and to support any additional investments in the CCAP program. As we know, CCAP is frozen in our community. There's never enough money. And so Heather has worked on and figuring out exactly how best to invest a portion of that reserve funding into CCAP. Do you want to add anything to that? No? As Lorenda mentioned, in 2023, the county released an RFP to identify the best administrative partner for the distribution of these tax dollars. And Early Childhood Council applied and, as Lorenda mentioned, was awarded that RFP. So we are currently in an MOU. I believe it's still active, and you'll have to let me know about that, between ECCLC and Larimer County as we work through this process. Should a ballot initiative get placed and be passed, that would be when we would negotiate a contract for administration between Early Childhood Council of Larimer County and Larimer County government to administer that funding. And please interrupt me at any time if you have questions. I'm going through this pretty fast. Also, last year, we did polling to determine whether or not a 2023 referral would be viable. And unfortunately, because the economy was in such a state last year, our community, while they knew that this was an issue, our polling showed very clearly that our voters understood and agreed that public funding is necessary for early childhood. Folks just didn't feel like they were willing to tax themselves. They were tight in their budgets, understandably so, given the cost of goods and services in this community. And so we did not have a viable path to victory in 2023. This year, we again conducted public polling in late May, so before the end of the school year, while folks were still around, not heading off to their summer vacations. And again, we're reminded that this community is very well tapped into the needs of childcare. Folks really understand that public funding is what it takes to fix the issue, that childcare is a huge barrier to economic growth in this community. Still in a place in our economic state that families were not, or individuals were not willing to tax themselves. So our percent of individuals in support of a taxation measure for 2024 was within our margin of error and therefore not something we were willing to ask for a referral for. We wouldn't want to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a campaign if there was not a viable path to victory, as that funding is much better invested into the system itself while we wait for a path to victory. We have continued investment in our public information campaign. As I mentioned, that's Larimer Thrive by 5 or larimerthriveby5.org. That information campaign has been incredibly successful. We reach thousands of individuals monthly with newsletters, advertising. We advertise in a variety of ways. And do you want to expand a little bit on the reach of our Larimer Thrive by 5 campaign?
Over the past couple of years, we've taken out billboards, we have done radio ads, digital ads online, and like Christina mentioned, our monthly newsletter, which has reached many thousands of people. I think we see that reflected really clearly in our polling. That's one of our victories, I'd say, like a small win that we've had over the past couple of years is there was not too much awareness, or if there was not enough awareness of the potential solutions. Now that has grown a ton, so we are getting people to come along. We're just not quite there yet.
I would say we've invested tens of thousands of dollars in this public information campaign since 2019. If you all recall, the county commissioners were part of the seed funding that helped us launch Larimer Thrive by 5, I believe back in 2019. So grateful for that investment, and we've continued to really grow that messaging, which Liz mentioned really shows in our polling. Our community really understands this issue, is very much behind us in understanding that childcare access is a huge issue for a variety of populations here in Larimer County. Collaboration with partner communities has also been a big part of the last year of work for us. This means we've worked alongside communities that have passed taxes already to really understand what they've been successful in doing, how they've done the work that they've done, what's worked and what hasn't worked. So really building upon the case studies that we did in 2021. I've worked really closely with Estes Park, who passed the $6E dollars. You all know, but for folks that are watching, the lodging tax that was passed to support childcare and housing in Estes Park. Early Childhood Council of Larimer County has been a big partner through that process to help them determine where to allocate the funding, where it will be most effective. We've also worked with partners in La Plata County. They're putting a what's the word? Huh? They're putting initiative on the ballot as well for lodging tax, this year. So they're looking to do something similar. I've worked with our colleagues alongside in Summit and San Miguel counties who have already passed sales, or actually they've passed property taxes to support earlier care and education. So really making sure that we are staying tapped into our local communities that have made some progress in local solutions, and we're continuing to learn from them. We've also began work alongside Boulder County and Weld County, because we've recognized, and of course we've always recognized this, but I think it becomes more and more prevalent as Larimer County becomes so expensive, that children and families don't exist within the bounds of Larimer County, right? They work and live across the border, or the county lines of, Weld and Boulder as well. In fact, a good portion of my younger staff with young children have begun migrating to Weld County because it's too expensive to live here, right? And so we've had conversations alongside those partners on whether or not a regional solution is something we should consider as well. You all are likely aware, I believe you, Commissioner Shattuck McNally will be with us next week, Monday the 30th. We're having a regional child care innovation summit. Commissioner Stevens, you'll be there. I don't remember who's coming. Oh, great. Love that. Yes, ma'am.
I was stopping by, but actually it's also the Colorado Attorney General's Abatement
perfect.
Summit, and since I'm chair, I'll be at that as most of the day, but thank
Great.
you.
And so, yeah, that's a really kind kind of a launch of our regional efforts to increase collaboration across those county lines to ensure that we're developing solutions that work for all of our counties. We have had conversations around whether or not a multi-county initiative should be brought forward, and right now we are not quite in the place for that to be viable. I think we in Larimer County have done so much that we are very far ahead of our peers in Weld and Boulder, and so the consultants that we rely on heavily to help guide us through the political processes have advised that we try one more time here in Larimer County because of how close we are. What I think is really great about that is that if we're successful, our partner communities in Boulder and Weld can really build upon that success, can duplicate some of the work that we've done. And we've done a lot to make sure that the lessons that we've learned can be passed on to our partner communities to ensure that that's replicable. But I believe that regional approach will continue to be high priority for us. As you all know, the NOCO Works workforce efforts that have been happening have been very Larimer and Weld focused. And so I think all of our communities are recognizing that it's become very regional for us. And then lastly, this year, I've engaged in some state policy work as well. There is a group that is considering looking towards a state ballot initiative that would fund early care and education, largely because of the work that's happened in our local community and others to really generate public awareness and develop some solutions. And so I'm fortunate enough to be tapped into that statewide group as well, which I think is very fortunate for us as we work towards a local solution so that we can ensure that we're informing statewide work and not being duplicative. I don't anticipate a statewide ballot initiative coming in the next year or two. I believe the earliest that this coalition that has recently formed within the last few weeks and began the policy work, we'll be looking at 2026 at the earliest, and so we've got some time to try and figure out some local solutions before that would happen. The other positive there is that because I'm tapped into the statewide work, that we can ensure that if something passes here, it will be complementary and can work alongside a statewide initiative should that pass, rather than being duplicative, so that we can be most efficient with taxpayer dollars. Okay, so what's next? Where do we go from here? This year we are not seeking a referral, and that is again largely because our voters are not in a place to be willing to tax themselves for good reason, right? The world is still very expensive. I think what we've seen since we polled in May of 2024 of this year is that inflation is going down. The Fed just cut the interest rate last week, I believe. And so I think we will start seeing a change in consumer sentiment and likely a change in how folks feel about a taxation initiative locally, hopefully in a positive direction. As a colleague at the U.S. Chamber said in a previous meeting today, the election brings us a big old shrug. We don't know what's going to happen in November, and so that's going to play a very big part in kind of where we go from here. What we plan to do within our own agency is we have already secured polling to engage in another round of, we've already secured funding to engage in another round of public polling in spring of 2025. So to really determine, again, where our voters are feeling and how, whether or not it might be viable to place the sales tax initiative on the November ballot of 2025. I do want to say I think it turned out to be quite fortunate that we didn't place a ballot initiative this year. The county obviously had, and which is on here, I'd love to discuss, other priorities as well to place the transportation tax. I think the ballot this November is incredibly complex, and so it's likely a good thing for us that we're not on that ballot as well. But we've already secured funding for polling in 2025 from partners at the Buell Foundation. And then we have continued our investment in the public information campaign, Larimer Thrive by 5, to ensure that this remains an issue that's top of mind for our voters, that folks continue to understand its impact on Larimer County. Possible barriers, as I mentioned, tax appetite in Larimer County. If the transportation tax that has been placed by you all passes this year, that may or may not impact individuals' appetite for additional taxes locally. The movement at the state or the federal level is on there just for fun. I'm not really holding my breath in terms of what will happen at the federal level. As you all know, that takes much longer. But I do know that there is some movement at the state level, and like I said, I'm tapped into that well. And what I think would be important discussion points within this work session are the anticipated impact of the transportation tax, whether or not you've all considered that as in terms of the overall tax appetite of our voters, and then the status of the MOU between Early Childhood Council of Larimer County and you all, whether or not we continue that, what that looks like going forward, so that we know kind of what our next steps will be.
So if
Christine,
it's,
yes, this would be a good time for questions, discussion. Looks like Heather wants to weigh in a little bit.
I was just going to provide an update on the MOU, if you want to start there, and then we can move to the other discussion item. So the MOU is up through December of 2024. So it does carry on through the end of this calendar year. And I have worked with the county attorney's office to draft an amendment. If you all would like to amend it for one more year to go through calendar year 2025 or whatever timeframe you all decide. And then I would submit that to you all through your administrative matters process for signature. So we do still have a couple more months, and I'll finalize the amendment. And just would look to you for direction of what timeframe if you want to extend. Do you want to do it through the calendar year, or is there another timeframe that you think would be more appropriate?
Would there be other aspects of the MOU that would be potentially amended, or is it just the time frame, just extending what we have in place for another year or so?
It's really just the timeframe. The rest of the deliverables are still in place and would still need to be acted on next year if the polling shows different results and if the council wishes to bring in a ballot initiative next year. So it really is just the date.
Thank you very much, Heather. Let's see, I'm sure my colleagues have some questions or comments. I certainly have a list of questions. We'll see how well we get to all of these. Commissioner Stevens, do you want to begin?
Sure, thank you. Well, thanks, Christina, for your presentation. We appreciate the collaboration over the years. When we're looking at that timeline, it's like, wow, you've been certainly working on this for a number of years. We have been trying to work with you on this for a number of years, and we still know it's really important. So I would like to see the MOU amended for another year. I think that makes sense, to do that. That MOU spells out all those, the breakdown of how the funding would work, and is that right?
It does for the purposes of what would go on the ballot.
On the ballot, okay.
And then we would still need to take that same information and put it into a contract if the funding becomes
Sure.
available.
Okay.
So it would transition into a longer-term contract.
Okay.
But it does have the breakout of how the money would be spent from the voters' perspective.
Yeah, okay, thank you for the reminder, because it's been a minute since we visited that. And that obviously the MOUs would provide the basis for a contract were this to be on the ballot, and, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that it makes sense to amend for another year. I mean, hopefully the polling improves. It will be a shorter ballot, so I think that's helpful. I guess with regard to the transportation tax, it's a pretty modest ask, 0.15. So, I mean, I think we purposely kept it at a rate that felt doable for our community while still getting some money. Obviously, statutorily, we're required to take care of our roads and bridges. And so we just weren't able to do it with current funding. And we needed dollars to really leverage some of the federal dollars that are available, because everybody's like, well, just use this, this infrastructure. Well, you have to have 25% match to use those infrastructure dollars. And then those grants are competitive, so there's no guarantee you get those. So I think that was why we were looking at a transportation tax this year. Like I said, I think we purposely kept it at a modest amount to make sure that it was palatable to people, but also knowing that there might be other needs in the future, including this tax, which, we've been, supportive of. We understand the need for public funding. I think that, it's very clear that that's a need in our community. From the perspective of parents, employers, from the perspective of, people who work in this industry who clearly aren't paid enough. So I guess I would just say that, for at least speaking for myself, my commitment is still there. That's why I wanted to renew the MOU. That's why I want to, keep pushing forward. And I appreciate Larimer Thrive by 5, because I think the education piece is huge around making sure that people understand why this is, it's a need for families. It's an economic need. Like, there's so many spaces where this is going to help whether it's, high-quality education for young people. And so I think that making that case to our community has been a real asset to trying to push this forward. So I don't think I have any further questions, so I'll let someone else talk. But
Thank you, Commissioner. Before we turn it over to Commissioner Shattuck McNally, I just want to acknowledge that Laura Walker, who is the Director of our Human and Economic Health Service Area, is also present, so appreciate your presence. Commissioner Shattuck McNally, please.
First, thank you, Christina and Liz, for being here today. It's great to see you all, and thank you for your tireless work in this space. It's really important to, even though we haven't achieved the goals that we all wanted to set, it's important to keep this in front of the voters and folks to understand that the need is not going away, it's not solving itself, and it actually probably grows greater, as we've seen with some of the things that we've had to do as a county. So first, want to thank you for your work here in this area. My first question, and kind of curious, you mentioned several counties that you've been working across the state with and supporting with their efforts, and I'm curious about, are those smaller communities, and how is that polling looking, and is it similar to what we're trying to do here, or what does that look like?
Absolutely, yeah. So I want to comment real quick on Commissioner Stevens' comment. My colleagues and I were in a conversation with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce just before here today, and a big part of that conversation was how intertwined housing, childcare, and transportation are. So I just want to say, I really appreciate that you all are working on all of those issues. I do feel like it's been a really collaborative process. We were aware that you all were going to seek a transportation initiative this year before it came forward, and so just really want to continue to thank you all for the collaboration that we've experienced in the last couple of years. I feel like it's a testament to the relationships we have around this table that we felt really well prepared for that initiative, and really that we're all still very much on the same page. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you for that. In terms of the work that we've done along with our partner communities, the majority of the communities that we're working with have already passed a tax. And so we're learning from them about the administration processes, what's working, what's not, kind of the barriers that they've ran into. La Plata County, as one of our partners that has sought an initiative for this November ballot, I believe they're polling pretty well, again, because it's a similar tax to what happened in Estes Park, where it's the tax that the local residents don't pay, right? La Plata County is a very well-touristed area as well, and so it's helpful for them to say, this is a lodging tax that you don't have to pay. It's for the folks that are coming into our community. I think Estes Park has done that. I'm not sure that would work here, right? It's not something we've considered, but I do think it's fantastic that the state has changed the way that lodging tax can be allocated so that communities can, particularly our more touristed communities, can rely upon it.
So my next question, and you kind of started to answer it when you responded to Commissioner Stevens' comment, is, yeah, we appreciate the collaboration. We, as a county, we have a depth and breadth of things that we do, and transportation is one that's we have a lot of needs and critical needs, and they all impact working families every single day. And with transportation funding, though, it's so complex, and if we raise this much money, we have to share it with the municipalities. So it's a complex thing, and I think a lot of voters don't understand the complexities there. And the same thing with childcare, people don't understand kind of the complexities, but why it's so important. So that was my comment, was just kind of thank you for understanding that and knowing that it's not that we are shifting priorities. They're all priorities, and I wish we had magic wands and crystal balls, but we don't have those things. But we're sort of at the table because we have been since we all started here as this new board, to stay at the table and keep talking and trying to problem solve and figure this out. And so that's why I am supportive of continuing the MOU for another year. I think it is important that we continue to learn and grow. And I want to do it for 1 year because I feel like as you are learning from these other organizations, that's the reason I asked my question, is we might learn some lessons learned across the state, just in case. And we also have lessons learned from our other sales taxes, from the mental health, behavioral health initiative that I worked on, that we have some things we can to know how that works, because what works in Denver certainly does not probably work here, or what works in La Plata. And I love my colleagues down there; they're wonderful people. But it's a different kind of situation, and so I appreciate that partnership and that flexibility to try to continue to see how we can collaborate. The next question I have is: you mentioned a lot of your workers and folks that are moving out and continue to commute in, and you mentioned Weld County, and you talked maybe a regional model, and that kind of piqued my interest because we do a lot of things here well, as I call it the Limerick Way, and are regionally working together on opioid abatement, behavioral health, transportation, workforce development, the list goes on. So one thing I always thought I heard from you all is sometimes it depends on the family. Either it's easier to have childcare near your home or childcare near your place of work. And so we can't maybe do both, or maybe there's a mix. So I'm wondering if this is changing in your polling, what is that showing of whether childcare should be near where you go to work or nearer to maybe your home or your older kids' elementary schools? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were asking folks their ideal scenario, it would depend on the family, right? But unfortunately, our community and Larimer County, Boulder County, Weld County, we're all in the same boat, right? Folks will take childcare where they can get it. So we're not in a place where folks can say, I really want it next to my home and that's where I'm going to aim for. I really want it next to my work. They take it where they can find it. My colleague that runs the Boulder Council takes her child out of the county to find childcare. Some of our staff that live in Weld County still were able to find childcare here because they work here, right? So it really depends on the family and on what's available. I think we're not really asking what's ideal because it's not fair to voters to say, what's your pie in the sky, because we can't create it. Right now, we're really just trying to create enough spots for individuals to be able to access regardless of where they are. A comment to your previous statement around, learning from our other communities. I want to plug what we're doing here as, the individual that we met with in the previous meeting sought us out from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce because he had heard about the incredible work that we're doing here in Larimer County. So just kudos to everyone in the partnership that we've developed, because I think that really says a lot that folks around the country are hearing what we're doing and are coming to seek information on the models that we've created. And what I continually plug in these conversations is it has been very much the partnership between the county and nonprofits and, the business community, our chambers of commerce, that have made this successful and possible. So just kudos to the work that we've done and the relationships that we've built, because I think it's been incredible.
Well, you must be reading my mind, because that was my next comment or question was, you had mentioned about businesses in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I know our other chambers are supporting the transportation tax, and but also they know this is important for lots of reasons for small businesses and a lot of our workforce throughout the county. So how is that sector looking to be more of, do you feel like they're looking to be more of a voice, presence, advocate, driving force? Just curious about that.
Very much so, yes. I think, for instance, this conversation we had prior to this meeting, the Chamber of Commerce sought us out immediately to say, let's talk about this with the U.S. Chamber. Let's ensure that we're keeping this conversation top of mind. Just 2 months ago, we had an event alongside our Chamber of Commerce and several business leaders throughout the community. I believe you were actually at that one, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, where we had the national author Elliot Haspel come in and talk through, solutions that he's seen. So I think our business community and our chambers remain very strongly engaged in this issue. They really understand it, and I think that, again, says a lot about the education that we've done over the last several years and the engagement that we've had. Next week, as I mentioned, we've got a regional Child Care Innovation Summit, and we have almost 200 people registered, and it was targeted at our business community. So I think that really says a lot around the momentum that's been built and the fact that, those that run large businesses and employ the folks in our community really understand the impact of childcare on their outputs, their ability to retain employees, their ability to attract new employees into this community. And so I think we'll continue to enjoy that support because we've made such a strong case over the last several years.
That's I appreciate the answer. That's really heartening to hear. And so I think that's only comments I have is just thank you for the partnership, and because there is a power in partnerships and collaboration, and appreciate your voices in the different spaces you're working. And I do support us continuing to work together, because I think we are, with the Thrive to Five and everything, it's just really important to keep this in front of folks. And I will state again, I do support continuing the MOU. Thank you.
My turn. I have a few questions, but to get it out of the way, I agree with my colleagues that we should, the direction is to extend the MOU by at least through 2025. And I think probably a year is a good idea, because things change rapidly these days. A few questions. One that comes to mind based on some of the more recent comments, discussion, in terms of engaging the business community, specifically NOCO Works, which identifies one of our favorite topics, the lack of access and affordability to childcare. That's called out. Transportation is called out, and certainly, what's the other one? Housing, of course. So I'm wondering how closely you all are working with our economic and workforce development folks, or regionally, Weld County, Larimer County, as far as NOCO Works. They're doing a lot of good research analysis. There's an 80-page report. So that would be one question, and perhaps a corollary to that, if I may, and that is, you mentioned, I think, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce conversation this morning. Maybe I misheard that. But in terms of our local chambers, including Wellington, including Red Feather Lakes, what is your, related to the first question, what is your thinking at this point around ongoing engagement and, creating perhaps a momentum and a buy-in ongoing? It can't work, in my opinion, just as a one-off. We had a nice meeting, have a nice day, we'll see you in 6 months. So I believe there are two questions embedded in there, Christine, and is it Liz?
Liz, yes. Yeah, I can start with saying we were heavily involved in the NOCO Works barriers report. I've talked to Dr. Alexis Kennedy several times. I believe we're mentioned in that report many, many times, because childcare is such an issue. So we work very closely with the NOCO Works group and have continued to work alongside economic and workforce development with Larimer County. I believe our workforce program I was talking with Marcy Kasner in the economic and workforce development within the last week. And so it continues to be a very strong collaboration between our two agencies there as well, to ensure that we're tapping into the resources the economic and workforce development have. I believe this particular conversation was around continued education and ensuring we're getting more childcare educators into the field. And so the fact that Marcy sought us out when this funding came through to really figure out where we could partner, I think says a lot in terms of that continued collaboration in terms of workforce. When it comes to local chambers and kind of continuing that momentum, that's really what we're doing, right? I think we had this conversation in June where we invited a national author in, and Yvonne at the Fort Collins Chamber has done a phenomenal job of seeking additional ways to continue to bring this conversation forward. She had the U.S. Chamber of Commerce call and immediately called me and said, how do we make this happen, right? We're continuing to find ways to engage our other community chambers. Liz and her strategy team do a phenomenal job in ensuring that communication materials are getting to all of our chambers, that we're having conversations, that they're being inviting to these regional summits to just make sure that we're keeping folks tapped in and well aware. I think, I can't speak for the sentiment of all of our chambers at any given moment, but from what I've continued to hear and the fact that the U.S. Chamber is very much on board with this issue, I think we're in the right direction, and we'll continue to build that momentum as we continue to seek a ballot initiative.
Thank you. May I continue? I'll try to keep it to another 5 minutes or so, but that might be, I want to make sure we manage our expectations here. Good discussion, important. Let's see. Regarding and I guess it relates to the engagement with the business folks and all that, and obviously you're thinking about that. I'm not surprised that you're not thinking about it. And that is, in terms of the outreach and the public information campaigns, one of the things that I've learned recently, attending two events yesterday, that oftentimes we tend to be very well-intentioned, but how we're reaching folks and who we're reaching, certainly through an equity lens and a DEIJ lens, how are you incorporating that thinking, those values, to connect with communities that perhaps are not always at the table. Oh, good, we get to hear from Liz, that's cool.
Yeah, in the last 2 years, we've done a lot in the DEI space. We actually have a DEI manager on board now that helps us take that lens with everything that we do. We're really proud of the work we've done so far, but we're always aware of how and basically in what ways we're reaching people, exactly like you said. So not everyone is going to be at Chamber of Commerce lunch and learns in the middle of the day. We also do town halls. We do a variety of like online or in-person focus groups. We are in attendance at many events around the community where people already
materials being
are.
presented in various languages?
Yes, we have good linguistic.
Consideration for language justice and like when you
Yes.
do, okay.
Yeah, mostly in English and Spanish right now. We do have a new community engagement associate position that we also hired on. She speaks Spanish and has helped us get into the Spanish-speaking community quite a bit. We offer simultaneous interpretation at most of our events and have done a lot with translation with our materials. So.
I would say we're leading the way in that space, particularly amongst early childhood organizations throughout the state. We were the first to offer some of our trainings in workforce development in Spanish and really pushed the state to follow suit. And then they, created the bilingual licensing unit that just happened in the last legislative session. In terms of, public outreach, again, this position that we've created and the work that we do, we are showing up at community events where our less privileged individuals, our Spanish-speaking families are showing up so that they hear the same messages. They're offered the same opportunities to engage and to provide feedback and to really help us understand what their needs are. That includes, showing up to food distribution sites and community events within our trailer or our mobile home park communities, things like that, right? So I think we continue to find additional opportunities to engage with the community in all of the ways that we can so that folks are included.
Great, thank you. I think, if I may, I indicated 5 minutes, so I think I have about another 3, and then we'll see if my colleagues have other thoughts or questions, or certainly we want to tap into our county manager's thoughts. Let's see, a comment, maybe there's a question in there as well, is when you were, in terms of the modeling of the design and all of that, it looks like the proposed allocation of funds, the percentages, are very similar to the original proposal. I wonder if you would perhaps comment on that. And also, I think in relation to that, in the discussion about the transportation ballot initiative, if the county is successful in passing that 0.15%, that'll bring the total sales tax, county sales tax, to 0.95. If we were to consider a 0.25 for the child care, that's something to keep in mind. I wonder if you're thinking about that, or if your consultants are thinking we could potentially exceed the higher than the 1%. So a couple of things in there, I'm sorry.
Absolutely. It's no problem. I'll answer the last question first, and I might have you remind me of the first one. Yes, we are absolutely considering the level of sales tax that we're implementing. I think when we poll again in the spring, that will be a consideration to determine kind of what the appetite is of our voters and whether or not we want to exceed certain thresholds, right? I think our community still is, in the middle of the pack, even if the transportation passes in terms of how much we're taxing in sales tax. And so we have some room still. We're certainly not at the top end of the spectrum for most of our partner communities. And so that's helpful, right? I think it allows us some space to continue solving some of these larger community issues. Remind me what your first question was again.
Of course, in terms of the modeling and the proposed allocation of funds, it seems the same or similar to when we first started this journey. And I'm wondering if anything has changed, although to my layperson's perspective, it seems to make sense that we put half of it into tuition assistance.
Yeah, we've done additional cost modeling. We were fortunate that the Bell Policy Center and Brodsky Research created a cost modeling tool that I was able to access after the fact. We're actually in the middle of their creation of it. And so I was able to continue doing some cost modeling based on, changing economic factors, the changing demographics of our community. And it's really clear that the needs are very similar. I think we we cut back a little bit to accommodate the need for a reserve fund and to be able to invest in CCAP as necessary. And so the reduction there would have been more in the workforce investments because we know the biggest burden for families continues to be tuition assistance. The other piece of that too is that the continued need for that 50% of that pot to go into tuition assistance is that we passed universal preschool, right? And a lot of folks are like, great, we've got this investment into the early childhood system. Families don't need as much. It's just for 4-year-olds. It's just 10 to 15 hours a week for most 4-year-olds. And what we've seen is that has decreased the ability of families to access infant toddler care. There's less infant toddler care, and the cost of that continues to be phenomenally high. And so the need to invest in tuition assistance for families first and foremost has anything, it's grown because of universal preschool, because there's less access and the cost is so high. I think we heard from our partners at Teaching Tree this morning that, you know, they've got all these new classrooms at the Loveland Youth Campus that were opened. And while they'd love to be able to open them as infant toddler classrooms, the way a childcare business is developed is that they have to rely on those older ages to subsidize almost infant toddler care because it's so expensive, right? So if we're able to invest in tuition assistance for infant toddler care through this tuition assistance model, we're hopeful that we'll be able to even that out for businesses as well, right?
Great.
So I think, yeah, it continues to be a very huge need.
Thank you. I have other questions, but I'll pause and see if my colleagues have any additional questions or thoughts. Check in with Lorenda, and then if time allows, I'll offer any of my additional questions. And I'm glad you mentioned CCAP. I'd like to better understand what you're thinking about how this money might potentially help complement, but not at the moment. Commissioner Stevens, any other questions, thoughts, wisdom?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Oh, really? Commissioner Shattuck McNally?
I'm good, thank you. And again, just my gratitude.
Oh. Lorenda, what do you got for us?
I think I'll just say the importance of this memorandum of understanding is we know that voters in Larimer County want to understand what they're voting for, not just the amount, and not just the general topic, but what they're actually going to get. And so this MOU really does spell that out in a way that that does provide that specificity to the public without having a contract in place or all the things that we will do once a sales tax passes. So I want to give a great amount of kudos. Hours and hours and hours have gone into these conversations about what should be in the MOU, how the relationship will work, understanding what early childhood council's needs are, understanding what the county's needs are, and really coming to a solution that I think is a model for how local government and nonprofits can work together to really meet a need of a community. Neither one of us can do it alone, but collaborating, working together, having that strong partnership and relationship, I think is really demonstrated by this MOU that we're extending now for another year.
Thank you, Lorenda. I guess I can offer a few other comments or questions. Well, the reserve thing, I don't know if in the MOU, will that be spelled out a little bit in terms of potentially helping CCAP? Or I think you mentioned cliff effect, and I don't recall you remind us what the duration of this proposed sales tax is. Is it 15 or 20?
Excuse me. We're proposing 20 years continued, and largely because we've learned a lot from our partners at Denver Preschool Program. They just completed their longitudinal data analysis of children that were enrolled in preschool when they first started, and that's really the best way for us to determine long-term outcomes and show what's working. And so we'll continue to ask for 20
Will
as
some of
long
these
as that's
details
amenable.
be spelled out perhaps, or already are spelled out in the MOU?
So they are, the MOU doesn't go to this level of detail, but there is an attached sort of spending plan by category. So the portion that would, so there's a little bit of a difference. A certain percentage would be retained by the county. The 20% would be retained by the county. A portion of that will go into reserves, so that if there is a decrease in the revenue that's coming in from the sales tax over the course of the contract, then the reserves could be utilized as you all make decisions on how to sustain the services that Christina and her team are providing out to the community. So there is a portion of that 20% that would go into reserves. The other and we haven't figured out the logistics yet, but there are, so CCAP has been on a freeze, as you all are very well aware, since February. And there is the opportunity then to look at, do we use a portion of that 20% to try to prevent a freeze or a wait list into the future as changes are happening in the CCAP program. So, and then there are also, there is other language in that category that just looks at, in addition to CCAP, other services that you all might want to provide to families with young kids, you know, navigating CCAP. So it is both the CCAP piece and a dedicated amount to go into reserves that's covered in that 20%.
And I believe you're reminding us that the 20% also includes some administrative costs for the county to administer the funds. Okay.
Yes, there would be an accountant that would work closely with the council to execute the contract payments, you know, get the dollars out too.
If I might add, that I think that's a really important distinction that I'm not sure we really made really clear. We did an RFP for services because the county will receive the funds. The county is not an expert in early childhood services, aside from CCAP and the work that Human Services does. So that's why that set aside is there, to make sure we have those services covered to the extent we can, and that we have a reserve so that there isn't a kind of an up and down of services we're able to provide as sales tax may increase or decrease over the life of the economy. 20 years is a long time to try to predict. And then we would contract with the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County to then provide these services on behalf of the county, which is why Heather talks about, if we have an economic issue, you all may decide to scale back in one area or another based on that contract. We don't think that's going to be required, but that's how we manage all the contracts, whether it's paving or services. You all are the owners of those contracts, and the contract provider, in this case, would be the Early Childhood Council.
Thank you. I'd like to offer maybe two more questions, and I'll be done for today. And that is, in the past when we've had these conversations, I think a conclusion that was drawn perhaps from that early round of polling was that combining childcare with housing, two of the big deal barriers to meaningful engagement in the workforce, is not a good idea in terms of polling or something like that. But I'm wondering, we had success in Estes Park with their lodging tax. What are the lessons learned from that? Are there nuances to your polling that also provide some insights other than you just painted a broad picture, but I'm sure there's little nuggets in there, details. But I guess the biggest thing is housing and childcare. Is that totally off the table? And if so, perhaps why? Or is that something we should keep an eye on if it ever makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it continues to be something that we think through, right? It's something that we've asked about tentatively in polling, but we continue to hear that folks are not as palatable to, or that a measure that would include housing is not as palatable to our voters. What we know in this sector is that housing and childcare are intertwined, right? If a family is paying $1,500 a month for one child to access childcare, that's $1,500 a month that they can't invest in housing, right? And so I think even if we're not generating revenue that's specifically designated for housing, we will inevitably have an impact on housing access because we're reducing another massive cost for young families in this community. And so that's part of the messaging that we continue to share, is that we know that the price tag to solve the housing issue, or even to have a large impact, is much bigger than it is to solve for childcare, right? But it will have a very large impact on the folks that really struggle with housing access to begin with, which was our younger families. We were having a conversation again this morning that the number of young families in Larimer County continues to fall, and that our average age continues to climb, and it's largely because of this issue, right? Young families can't afford housing and childcare in Larimer County. So if we're solving one, which this initiative would largely solve this issue for Larimer County, then we will have, I'm positive, we'll have a positive impact on, housing access.
So you mentioned state policy. You didn't mention federal policy. Well, maybe a little bit. But in light of the fact that this particular issue seems to be a bit front and center, especially folks running at the top of the ticket, and they have different answers to this conundrum. How are you taking that into consideration? For example, would the Congress ever appropriate additional funds for the Child Care Development Block Grant, and how might that trickle down to us? I mean, how are you thinking about that? And then what are the next steps other than working on this MOU, and then maybe a closing comment?
Absolutely, yes. So when we're talking about federal solutions that could potentially come down, I think the most likely would be additional investment in the Child Care Development Block Grant. Whenever we see additional funding come through, it does often come through early childhood councils, and it is very often minimal. I think when you're spreading it out through an entire state, even if the state or the feds allocated an additional $200 million, when you're spreading that out between state administration and all of our counties, it's not enough. When we did our initial cost modeling, the gap between affordable care in Larimer County, how much we need to really make it affordable for families, it's $52 million. So we'll bring in, say, $27 million with a tax initiative. We still have a $20-some million gap, right? So best case scenario, the feds continue to invest and then we fully cover it, right? I think the more realistic scenario is that they'll allocate, another $50 million or something to this Child Care Development Block Grant, and it's not going to have a huge impact. I think what we thought was, or what we had hoped and what a lot of voters thought would happen when we passed universal preschool was that, oh, great, we're going to solve this, right? And it's brought, $10-15 million of investment into Larimer County. Not enough. When we're doing our cost modeling, it's still, we have tens of millions of dollars in a gap. So I think I would love it if the feds come up with a solution, and I think we will be well poised to complement any solution. But I have very little concern that we'll be duplicative in any way, because we're never going to get that much money into Larimer County.
Thank you. I guess to kind of close on my part, and hopefully you have heard that we are very supportive of what we're trying to address here. And I think lessons learned, for example, from the behavioral health, the second time around with the behavioral health sales tax initiative, which of course Commissioner Sheddock McNally was very involved in, is that it's critical not to have the public perceive that this is a Fort Collins kind of a deal. And I think one of the successes of that was that you had a whole bunch of elected folks and other folks, community leaders, come together unified to convey a message. So with that in mind, I'd like to convey, I think it's appropriate to say that wherever we can help in this public information campaign, where it's appropriate, please consider that as a resource to be helpful. Oh, yes. Why don't you wrap us up there, or Commissioner?
I don't know if it'll be a wrap-up, but I do want to, highlight one of the things you said is that solving, when we're talking about solving childcare versus housing, I mean, $27 million roughly is, can solve a big portion of that. $27 million would not even maybe build an apartment building. One. And so the excitement about this issue is that we can mostly solve it with this tax. We don't have a lot of issues where we can largely solve the problem, or at least solve the problem for the people who are struggling the most. This is an area where we have this real opportunity to be able to almost pretty close to solve a problem, right? And no other tax that I can think of has ever done that. And like you said, it puts more money in people's pockets to be able to afford their housing. I know that my childcare costs more than sending my kid to a public university. I mean, when my kids were infants and toddlers, that cost was, and my kid can actually work summers to help with his tuition. Your 2-year-old or 1-year-old cannot do that. And so, I mean, this is something that I believe we really need to help people out in our community, and I think it's an investment in the future, and it also is a workforce issue. So,
thanks,
that's
Commissioner.
it for
Do
me.
you want to close us out, Commissioner Sheddock McNally?
I think we've had a great discussion today. Appreciate you all being here, and I look forward to us continuing to work together. Thank you.
Thanks. Ditto. Thank you all very much. Good discussion. At 11 a.m., we are adjourned.
Thank you all. Appreciate your partnership.